Thank you for joining us on a Sunday evening. In particular, Deputy Commissioner Garrett Ugalito and Commissioner Katie Dykes and Rep Sims. I'm Stephanie Thomas. I'm a state rep of the 143rd District representing Norwalk, Wilton, and Westport. And I'll just start by saying I'm a believer in science and the data that's in front of my eyes every day that tells me that climate change is real. And for the commissioner and deputy commissioner, you may not know, but here in Norwalk, we are currently in the midst of studying our industrial contractor yards and where they should be located based on some feedback about some environmental hazards in certain neighborhoods. In our community recently, a few months ago, fought a special permit proposal for a distribution center that would have meant over 1,000 weekly truck trips through a neighborhood with several schools. And although we talked about pedestrian and bicycle safety, the conversation also centered around emissions and concern about an increase in diesel particulate matter, which I thought more than anything else showed me that this community cares about the environment. But I know people's eyes can start to glaze over when you start talking about cap and trade programs and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. But I know we care. So Rep Sims and I thought, let's have an information session, get the experts here so that we can let people know what the Transportation Climate Initiative is, how it can help Connecticut, how it can help our community. I have received some emails from people who are confused. We've heard comments about gas taxes and no one is quite sure how it works. So before we turn it over to you to help us separate fact from fiction, I will turn it over to my colleague, Representative Sims, who will say a few words and introduce you. And thank you, everyone. Travis.
Thank you, Representative Stephanie Thomas. Certainly it's a pleasure to serve with you. And thank you for and your aid for helping put this this platform together. I really want to thank Commissioner Dykes and Commissioner Deputy Commissioner Ugalito. I hope I just didn't butcher your last name, but it certainly is a pleasure. It certainly is a pleasure to have you both before us. With I look forward to hearing a lot of the knowledge and experience that you both will share. When it was proposed to me by Representative Thomas at one of our last meetings before you guys, I was totally interested in making sure that we brought this the Transportation Climate Initiative before our constituents to educate them exactly what this climate initiative is and how this would address some of the concerns that we have in our communities. I serve, I'm the state rep for the 140th district in Norwalk. My district is served a lot of the lowest income residents and where a lot of these contractor yards are, where a lot of the concerns of pollutant and environmental hazards and things of that nature. This is also educational forum for myself as well as for everyone that's on this call. Probably on the outside of Carlo, because Carlo knows pretty much everything that has to do with transportation. So, but in any event, I want to thank you all for your indulgence of being on this call. I also like to thank all of our constituents and everyone else who also is participating, and we look forward to continue this conversation and listen to some of the discussions that take place today. So thank you very much. With that, I'd like to introduce Commissioner Katie Dykes. She's the commissioner for DEEP, which is the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, and also Deputy Commissioner of DOT, which is Department of Transportation, Deputy Commissioner Garrett Ugalito. So with that, I'd like to welcome you both, and Madam Commissioner, the floor is yours. Thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much, Representative Sims and Representative Thomas. We're just delighted to be with you here this evening to talk about the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. Thank you so much for helping us be part of this dialogue. We do think that, you know, across all of the different programs, all the different initiatives that we're working on, especially all the legislative items that we're advancing this year, I can't think about one that will be more transformative for communities like the communities that you serve than the Transportation Climate Initiative Program. And I'm excited to talk about why that's the case. So DEEP and DOT have been partnering together in this initiative. And, you know, there's a lot of complexity to the program. There's a lot of misinformation that's out there. And so it's really valuable for us to have this time to kind of set the record straight and really speak just at the basic level about what this program is and how it's going to impact communities, how it's going to improve the air we breathe, our public health, address issues of environmental justice, and promote economic development in our state. So we have a very brief kind of slideshow just to put some, I think the, you know, image is worth, 1,000 words. And so what we'll do is maybe if Garrett is able to share his screen, we can use this to get the conversation started. So, so the Transportation Climate Initiative Program is something that Governor Lamont signed an MOU last December, committing to seek to implement this program here in the state of Connecticut. And what this program does, it essentially implements a very successful model that Connecticut pioneered more than a decade ago for addressing greenhouse gas pollution and other air pollution from power plants. And that program, called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, was so successful that we have worked with our other neighboring states to apply the same successful model to the transportation sector. And basically, you know, the transportation sector is a major source of pollution in our state. If you go to the next slide. So it's the largest source of air pollution and the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our state. And almost all of that pollution that we're talking about is coming from vehicle traffic, from cars and trucks that are burning fossil fuels, namely gasoline and on-road diesel fuel. And the combustion of that fuel is, you know, even though it's something that is part of our everyday lives and we take it for granted, it is a major contributor, the largest contributor to air pollution and to greenhouse gas emissions that are causing climate change. And so we can't achieve better air quality, better public health for our state and a response to the climate crisis unless we tackle the transportation sector. Next slide. So 67% of the air pollution that's created here in our state comes from vehicles. That's a really staggering statistic. In part, that's, you know, we've made a lot of strides in reducing emissions from power plants by investing in efficiency and renewables, but our air pollution and our greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector have not really budged. So this is a major source of air pollution. And it's really important to note that the impact of that air pollution is not felt equally all across the state. Communities who live next to the highways, next to our interstates, in our urban communities where there's a lot of traffic. Representative Thomas, you talked about those industrial sites where there's a lot of medium and heavy duty truck traffic that are burning diesel and emitting particulates. These are communities that are experiencing air pollution, in some cases that's 15 to 20% higher than in suburban or rural communities. And so when we talk about making progress on environmental justice, addressing racial injustices that are prevalent in our state and reflected in zoning and you know, the types of pollution that communities are burdened with, the transportation sector is a major contributor to that when it comes to air pollution. So it's critical for us to make progress on environmental justice that we tackle vehicle traffic and vehicle emissions. Next slide. The other important reason to tackle transportation emissions is because of climate change. So 40% of greenhouse gas emissions that are created here in our state are created in the transportation system. And that is so the transportation system is the largest contributor of greenhouse gas emissions in our economy. We have a goal in statute, a mandate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 45% by 2030. We cannot meet that goal unless we implement the Transportation Climate Initiative program, unless we invest in ways that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and expand clean transportation alternatives. It's just impossible to meet that. And why do we have to take action on addressing climate change? This is a question that I don't take for granted. I mean, people are weighing a lot of different priorities and things that, we're working on and worrying about every day. Why does climate change need to be one of them, especially here in Connecticut? We're a small state. Well, the reason is that it's going to require global action to address climate change, and every state, every country has to do their part. We already know that because of the emissions that are already in the atmosphere, so everything that has already been emitted, okay, not even looking forward at more emissions to come, but because of what's already in the atmosphere, we have to plan that we will see a 5-fold increase in the number of days above 90 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. We're going to see 20 inches of sea level rise, more frequent droughts and intense storms. All of those are impacts that are baked in to our climate now as a result of the emissions we've already put into the atmosphere. The climate change is not something that we can just wait until it gets bad enough and then start to take action, because the impacts can be delayed over time. And so it's really, it's going to be very challenging for our communities, especially when you think about some of the impacts that communities of color and those communities living along those transportation corridors are already experiencing because of poor air quality. We have some of the highest asthma rates in the country. Hartford, New Haven are cities that have been ranked as some of the top 20 worst cities to live with asthma in the country. And that's because of the acute air pollution that we have in our state. And so you think about what that's going to look like when you add climate change to the mix. We already know on those hot weather days how difficult it can be for people to breathe, if you have asthma. And now imagine that we'll have a 5-fold increase in the frequency of days like this. So communities of color are going to be, and urban communities, are limited income populations, we refer to as frontline communities, because they're going to be feeling the effects of climate change first and worst. And that's why it's climate change and addressing the climate crisis is an environmental justice and a racial justice priority. So these are the major reasons why we need to take action in addressing emissions from the transportation system. So we go to the next slide. So the big question is, what can we do about this? How can we actually do something that will address air pollution, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector? Well, the good news is that there are so many different solutions that are available to us that we just need to invest in and scale up. And if we do so, we can make a major difference in reducing emissions from the transportation system. And that's basically what the Transportation Climate Initiative is intended to do. The program essentially will require polluters. In this case, the polluters are those who sell gasoline and petroleum fuels at wholesale, will require them to pay for the pollution that they are emitting in the state of Connecticut, that they're causing, the impacts that they're causing on communities in Connecticut. And the program takes that payment, essentially those dollars, and it turns around and reinvests them in communities in clean transportation options. Through participation in this program, we expect that Connecticut will generate about $1 billion of revenue between 2023 and 2032. It is an enormous step change in the amount of funding that we'll have available to invest in solutions that can clean up our air and address greenhouse gas emissions. The exciting part is that there are so many different solutions that are available to us to invest in that will make a difference in reducing emissions. And we're going to talk about a few of these. The program, the other exciting part about it is that while we are going to be implementing this program together with Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C., that $1 billion will come directly to Connecticut. That's our share of the program revenue. And it will be completely up to us here in Connecticut to determine how we want to spend these funds. And so we have a lot of flexibility to choose solutions that match the priorities and the needs and preferences of individual communities here in the state. And so Garrett and I are going to just talk about a few of those different options that are available to us so we can help to kind of capture the vision of what Connecticut can look like if we have $1 billion investment in smart transportation solutions. So Garrett, do you want to talk through some of these?
Sure. Thanks, Commissioner Dykes. Connecticut controls our own destiny with how we want to invest the dollars that are produced by the Transportation and Climate Initiative. And so I'm going to walk through some examples, but really it's going to be up to the communities and the residents of those communities to help make those decisions on how best to reduce emissions in their communities. The first one here you see on your screen is probably something that a lot of people in Connecticut are still getting used to, but converting an intersection into a roundabout saves lives, it reduces crashes by 50%, and it reduces emissions by 1/3. So you can drive your same car and reduce your carbon footprint just by going through a roundabout instead of a traditional intersection. Same thing with upgrading our traffic signals. It's very expensive for a community to upgrade their traffic signals, and all of us at Connecticut DOT, we have around 2,700 traffic signals we own in the state. We need to upgrade those as well. And when you upgrade them and you synchronize them and they're communicating to each other with the newest technology, they can dynamically shift to what the conditions on the roadway are, reducing the amount of red lights that you're sitting at. You're not going to have to sit there waiting while no other traffic is coming from the other side for your green light. It reduces your idling, it reduces your carbon footprint, and increases safety, just like a roundabout. We can invest in bikeable and walkable communities for safety and quality of life. One of the things that we hear most from people who move to Connecticut or come to visit Connecticut is the plethora of outdoor activities we have. We have a huge number of trails that have been built up in Connecticut, and we have a lot more we need to expand and build upon and try to build and finish the East Coast Greenway in our state. We need to do a lot more complete streets projects, making it safer for people to walk in their communities, patronize the businesses that are either in their downtowns or their village centers, and make it more hospitable places to just spend your afternoon, spend your evening. And we need to build out our bike infrastructure. Residents shouldn't take their lives in their hands by biking in their communities. Providing that alternative reduces household expenditures. Maybe you don't need 2 cars in your household anymore. Maybe you don't need 3 cars in your household anymore. One family member can bike to work or bike to school and get there safely. We can make electric vehicles more affordable and charging more accessible. Commissioner Dykes has an amazing program called Cheaper, which provides rebates for people to purchase electric vehicles here in Connecticut. And that's on top of the federal $7,500 tax credit that is still available for many models. And just recently, the Cheaper board has expanded it to be for used electric vehicles as well. So we're getting costs down, we're getting parity. It's the same cost to buy an electric vehicle as it is to buy an internal combustion engine vehicle. And we need to expand charging in our state. While we may have plenty of charging stations in a lot of our urban centers, in a lot of our rural areas, you can't find a charger. We need to make it easy for people to travel around our state. And we also need to make it easy for people who maybe live in an apartment building or a condo complex, don't have their own driveway or don't have their own garage, have on-road charging opportunities, have charging opportunities in the garage that they park their vehicle in, so that everyone has access and flexibility to purchase an electric vehicle. And we can switch our transit buses from diesel to electric. This is something that I'm very passionate about. I know Commissioner Dykes is as well. Connecticut DOT has around 700 transit buses in our fleet at CT Transit. That's not including the ones that are in Norwalk Transit District, Greater Bridgeport Transit, in the Wyndham Regional Transit. And we have an opportunity over the next 12 to 15 years to convert our state's fleet and be the first state to do this, to go completely electric. I think we can achieve that. That will remove the hot spots of diesel particulate matter in our communities where buses are idling and people are waiting to take the buses. It provides a cleaner ride and a quieter ride as well. I know a lot of us hear the buses go by. You're going to hear just a little electric whiz instead of the loud diesel engine. Not only transit buses, for school buses. I know Commissioner Dykes is passionate about this. She spoke at this event in Middletown, where the first electric school bus in the state had the cord cutting. And I know the school bus companies are committed to rolling these out across our state, and TCI can help make that a reality and help make that happen. As the costs continue to go down, it's going to become even easier to build out, I think, this and convert the 6,000 school buses in Connecticut. So the children of our state are not standing there next to the idling school buses, breathing in that diesel particulate matter in the mornings and the afternoons when they go to and from school. We can expand rail and bus routes for faster, more convenient service. We've already done this in parts of, we've launched the new Hartford line going from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield. We have great branch line service and mainline service, and we can increase frequency. We can make it more convenient for people to take rail to get to their jobs or get to school and get to other economic opportunities. And same thing with bus routes. Not only can we expand existing services and expand hours of service like Governor Lamont has proposed to do, but we can increase access to new locations that currently don't have bus service. This graphic here is in a rural area, Plainfield, Connecticut, in the northeast part of our state. They got their first transit system up and running, providing that link between the northeast and the southeast part of the state. And we can do that in other parts of the state as well, where we have service already. Let's build new routes and connect people who currently don't have access to bus service, so they don't need to have that household expense of insurance and paying a monthly car payment. They can just take the bus instead. And we can do that. What Norwalk Transit actually has done is pilot something called microtransit. That's a great opportunity to serve areas that maybe a fixed route doesn't make sense. Maybe the hours are a little different than what we need to serve, but that gets people out of their vehicles into that microtransit option. It's being piloted in Old Saybrook and New London as well. And we think that can be replicated and expanded all across our state. And I'll turn it back to Commissioner Dykes to close us out and talk about all the benefits and the specific parameters of the program.
Great. So thank you, Garrett. And so having talked about what transformative investments we would be able to make through the Transportation Climate Initiative program, I want to give a few minutes to exactly some of the nuts and bolts of how the program works, and also explain some of the address some of the myths that have grown up around the program. So the Transportation Climate Initiative program, as I mentioned, is modeled on the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, that Connecticut launched more than a decade ago. It's a market-based program. And so what it does is, again, it puts a regulatory requirement on wholesalers, fuel suppliers who are selling gasoline and on-road diesel at wholesale. Currently, they don't have to internalize or pay for the costs of the pollution that they're causing in the state of Connecticut by selling their product in our state. And so this program would essentially require them to do so. And the way that we do that is by setting a cap or a limit on the amount of emissions that we will allow from the sale of those fuels in the state of Connecticut. And the cap is set to decline over a 10-year period. So we want to give the industry time to prepare and make investments, and we want to be able to manage this ramp down in emissions over time. And the program essentially requires those fuel suppliers to purchase allowances to represent the emissions caused by the sale of their fuels. And then the revenue from the sale of those allowances to the fuel suppliers comes back to the state of Connecticut. And those are the dollars, the $1 billion that we project to receive over the coming decade that will be reinvested in the clean transportation solutions that we mentioned. If you go to the next slide. So essentially, this program will achieve a 26% reduction in greenhouse gas pollution from the transportation sector by 2032. That's really critical if we're able to, in order for us to be able to meet our 2030 target of a 45% reduction economy-wide. And a couple of different, there's some different questions that have come up about what kind of impact this program will have on consumers. We have done extensive modeling and preparation for this program. Over the last 2.5 years, we've been working with more than a dozen states across the Northeast. We've evaluated, different levels of ambition with the program and modeled all the different benefits. And we settled on this level of ambition, this cap trajectory that will reduce emissions by 26 by 2032. And our calculations determine that the program, if the fuel suppliers pass on 100% of the costs of complying with the program to their customers, we anticipate that we'll have about a 5-cent impact on gasoline prices when the program begins in 2023. And that impact will increase to about 10 cents by 2032 as the cap becomes tighter. There have been some opponents of this program who have been saying that the program will have a 17-cent increase on gas prices in 2023. That's not true. Because the program also includes a special cost containment mechanism, a consumer protection mechanism, to ensure that even in the worst case scenario, if we have misjudged some of the different parameters or factors in the transportation sector that are affecting the amount of emissions, that the program will essentially not, there will be a cap that will prevent the price of to consumers of going above 9 cents. That cost containment mechanism is sort of like the airbags in your car. If we see the price get to 9 cents in the beginning of the program, then we would go back in, reopen the regulation, and make adjustments to make the program a little less stringent so that the impact to consumers is moderated. Our goal is not to make driving expensive, not to make gasoline expensive. Our goal is to achieve emissions reductions through the investment of the $1 billion in clean transportation solutions. We don't currently have funding available at DEEP or DOT. We just simply don't have the revenue needed to invest in these clean transportation options at scale. And so it is not a small thing to move forward a program that we anticipate will have some impact on consumers, but we have carefully crafted this program in order to have a more modest impact on consumers and to give us adequate revenue, the $1 billion in revenue that we need to make transformative investments in our communities. We simply don't have any other means available at this time to make those investments. I am excited that the Biden administration has recently announced the American Jobs Plan, and then they are prioritizing a major infrastructure bill that will advance, funding for electric vehicle charging stations and electric vehicle rebates and tax incentives and all kinds of exciting things that will support our efforts to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. But those programs, federal programs, always require a state or local match. And so it's extremely timely for us to move forward with the Transportation Climate Initiative program so that we will have the dollars available in the state so that we can match those federal dollars and be first in line for getting unlocking federal investment in clean transportation solutions. The other really important part of this program, of course, if you go to the next slide, is its commitment to equity and environmental justice. So obviously, the folks that we are very concerned about is our limited income families and citizens across the state for whom a 5-cent increase in gas prices can be really challenging for that for people to pay. And as we think about how we can address that with the Transportation Climate Initiative program, we have made a commitment that actually, this is really exciting. So when Governor Lamont signed the MOU for this program with the other governors last December, the MOU included a commitment among all the states to spend at least 35% of the revenue coming from the Transportation Climate Initiative program in communities that are overburdened by air pollution or underserved by the transportation system. And since that time, DEEP and DOT have had a lot of dialogue with environmental justice advocates and community leaders, and with members of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus as well, and others who've been real champions for advancing clean transportation solutions in their communities. And as a result of those conversations, we've supported an increase in that percentage to 50%. And that is what came out of the Environment Committee. The JFS version of the bill includes that a minimum of 50% of the $1 billion of Transportation Climate Initiative investment will go to those communities that are overburdened by air pollution, underserved by the transportation system. And so that's how we begin to reverse the cycle of poor public health, of limited transportation options that hold back communities, that burden families with those visits to the emergency room, their kid who's challenged with asthma, missing work, the high health care costs that people have to pay as a result of the air pollution we've been suffering from our transportation system. This is how we reverse the economic development challenges that hold back communities that don't have access to transit, that don't have access to the transportation they need to get to work on time, to be able to access, get to the doctor that they want to go to. By expanding our access to the transportation system, we also expand access to quality of life and to economic development opportunities. And so this 50% investment, we think, will be especially transformative for those communities. And so this is why we're so excited about the Transportation Climate Initiative program. It's you can go to the next slide. It's really going to be incredibly impactful for this decade for communities across the state. There's also an urgency for us to get the authority to move this program forward now. DEEP does not have the ability or the legislative authority to enact this program without new authorization from the General Assembly. If we are able to get this authorization in this legislative session, then we have a commitment from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and DC that they will move forward with this program as well. It's no small thing to get this many states kind of on the same page at the same time to move forward together with the program. And Massachusetts does not need to get legislative authority. They already have it. Rhode Island they have legislation that they're considering now, but moving forward with this program now, we will be able to basically quadruple our impact because we'll not only be reducing emissions here in Connecticut, but we'll also get those other states and jurisdictions to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions as well. And that you see shaded in light blue a number of other collaborating states. As I mentioned, there were more than a dozen that have been part of this dialogue and planning this program over the last 2.5 years. Not all of them chose to move forward with the program last December to seek to implement it, but they continue to be at the table. Again, for issues of timing in many cases, we didn't see every state moving along at the same time. But I am very confident that we will see other states joining this program over time if we are successful in getting it launched here in Southern New England. This is exactly what happened with with RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program. It started small, and then more states have been joining over time. So this is a great way for us to not only make progress here in Connecticut, but also leverage our leadership by proving out successful models that attract more states to do the right thing over time. So with that, we are so grateful for this opportunity to kind of introduce the program, talk about what it means, how it's going to transform our communities, and happy to stick around or, take any questions or have any discussion. But I'm just so grateful again, Representative Sims and Representative Thomas, for the time that you've given us today, and for your interest and leadership on all these types of issues.
Absolutely. And kudos to you both for somehow taking a very complicated issue and condensing it into about 20 minutes. If anyone watching has questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. And while we wait, I feel like I now have 10 new questions. One thing I've heard a lot, or I've read about in the press, people are always talking about the gasoline tax, like this is a new gas tax, which I knew it wasn't, but I'd like something about what you said. I see it as an investment in the people of Connecticut. It's not so dissimilar. Think about what we could have done if the tobacco companies had to pay for all the incidents of lung cancer, decades before, we learned how dangerous it was. And when I think about the health costs of all the people breathing in all of this diesel, et cetera, it seems reasonable to let the market determine that they pay for some of the social costs. But one question, it occurred to me, based on your models or any thinking you've done, do you expect these companies to pass on 100% of their costs? I know, like in my business, it's very different, but my costs go up every year, but I can't always pass that along to clients. It's just not what I would do. I would lose customers, so I find other ways for savings. Have you played that out in your modeling at all?
Yeah, so again, it sort of reflects a level of caution and conservatism that we have made that assumption that they will pass on 100% of the costs. Again, I will say though that 5 cents, for example, can sometimes be the difference in price between gasoline on, at a station on one side of the street and the price, at a gas station, down the block. So, so we'll see what actually happens. But I think one of the wonderful things about this program is that because it's market-based, I mean, the reason that we've gone with a market-based program is that we want to utilize competition, right, among these fuel suppliers to try to achieve as much reduction in pollution as we can at the least cost to consumers. And so, one of the ways that this program does it, we know that fuel suppliers will want to compete to try to keep their costs of complying with the program as low as possible. And so rather than, we could go out like we do with a gas tax and just say, there's going to be a fixed, charge per every ton of emissions that you create. But instead, we're auctioning off allowances and letting the market, and through that auction, set the price. And the reason it makes it a little harder to explain the policy when it comes to legislative adoption. But the reason that we do it is because in many cases, we find that the emissions may turn out to be lower. It may turn out to be cheaper to get the emissions reductions that we need than we anticipated in the first place. Fuel suppliers will then be able to implement strategies to try to keep their costs down. For example, a diesel seller could blend biodiesel manufactured in Bridgeport, by the way, to lower, reduce their emissions content of their fuel, and then reduce the amount of allowances that they're going to have to purchase in this auction. That's one of the ways that we can get the benefit of economies of scale and, those actions that you just can't get when you're levying a charge directly on consumers. And, the contrast to the gas tax, thank you for reminding me about that one. A lot of people have been labeling this as a gas tax, and it's not. A gas tax, sets that fixed charge, right, per gallon. It doesn't put any of the, it doesn't bring the wholesalers into the equation, right? It doesn't give them any incentive to do anything different. And most importantly, a gas tax does not guarantee that emissions will actually reduce over time. It just makes driving more expensive. Our goal is to reduce emissions over time, to enlist competition among fuel suppliers at the wholesale level to get those emissions down as cheaply as we can. We've seen how well that's worked with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program. When we started that program over a decade ago, Representative Thomas, people said the same things. They said, it's going to make electricity so expensive, it's going to cause the grid to become unreliable. And like none of that happened. In fact, emissions have fallen much faster in power plants than we expected when that program started. And we've had to go back in twice into the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program and make it more stringent just to chase our success. And I'm very optimistic that if we do this for the Transportation Climate Initiative, we'll see the same kind of trend here as well.
I won't touch the reasons why electric prices are high, but that's a different topic. But Travis, before you ask a question, I have one related question because I know it's in the bill and you just referred to it, which is I think the phrase is auction or allowance auction. Can you explain what that is exactly and how this cost structure works for the wholesalers?
Sure. How the auction works?
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
just a phrase that I think people might
Great.
not know what it is.
So it's basically like this, Representative Thomas, if you are a, if you are someone, if you're a fuel supplier, and you're selling gas, your business is selling gasoline at wholesale and for sale in Connecticut. Let's say you're selling 1,000 gallons, we'll keep it simple, of gasoline every year. Then what we would do in this program is we'll just calculate the amount of carbon emissions that are produced by each gallon that you sell. And you will have to, for every ton of emissions associated with the volume that you're selling, you'll be required to purchase an allowance to cover those emissions. And you'll be able to go to a regional auction. They'll be held 4 times a year. All of the states that are in the program participate in the auction. So Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, DC, and that's where you'll be able to put in your bid for and purchase the allowances that you need to cover your fuel sales. And then the revenue from the sale of those allowances is divided among the participating states and flows back. So that's where, that's how we get the dollars that we need to invest in clean transportation solutions.
And I swear, Rep. Sims, I'll turn it to you in 1 second, but that reminded me, or that led to another question, which is there sort of parity between the number of wholesalers in some of the states that are participating, or is there an incentive to boost overall income to recruit some of the larger states, or how does that, I have no idea if what I'm saying makes sense, but.
In terms of attracting other states to participate in
Yeah.
TCI. So, I think that part of getting the program launched is proving that it works and getting that auction platform set up and creating the whole kind of mechanism for the program. Once we get all of that in place, and especially once the revenue is coming in from the program and we're turning around and investing that in clean transportation options, I think that it becomes really easy for other states to then join over time. They can simply kind of add in their emission allowances, and be able to start selling them into the auctions. And that's what we've seen happen with the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative program over time. We now have Pennsylvania that's looking to join the program. Virginia just joined, and it's been very easy to be able to accommodate those states joining our market over time. And it provides a lot of benefits to the fuel suppliers, to the regulated entities as well, when we do this on a regional basis, because they don't have to chase down different regulations in different states and sort of figure out a bunch of, red tape and what have you. It's one platform. We have an independent market monitor that reviews it for competitive activity. There's a lot of good protections that are built in. There's a lot of uniformity across the states. So from an economic competitiveness standpoint, all of the states participating in RGGI will have, we would expect that the consumer impact will be uniform among the states participating because it's one auction across all the states. So that's another economic competitiveness aspect or benefit of this program.
That's a great point. They know what's coming from those regional, the people participating. Predictability is key. Rep Sims, I'm sure you have questions. Sorry.
Well, a lot of my questions have been answered, but I do hear a lot of concerns about the rollout of the TCI program and how it will impact the urban communities. And if we're talking about lessening or reducing the emission content, how do we do that safely, but also taking consideration of those low-income families that wants to help with this program? Are there any incentives in place to work with EV companies that would, develop more affordable EV vehicles? That way, folks can trade in their combustion vehicles for EV.
That's a great. You've got it exactly right, Representative Sims. So I'm really proud that through the electric vehicle rebate program that we've had in place here in Connecticut for a number of years, called the Cheaper program. We have just recently announced that we will be expanding that program to provide for EV rebates for used electric vehicles, which is one gap that we had in the program before, that made it difficult for folks to be able to afford electric vehicles. And so we're really excited about that as one example. California has a sort of a cash for clunkers type program in place where they do provide that kind of a trade-in rebate for internal combustion engines, and then providing for an EV rebate as part of that. I think that, there's been a lot of misinformation out there that, electric vehicles are just for wealthy individuals, and that is not the case. We cannot let that be the case. We are seeing the purchase price of those, the sticker price for those vehicles come down very rapidly, and expect that to continue. But through having the TCI program in place, we'll have the dollars that we need in order to provide potentially for an income sensitive rebate, for example, so that we can help close the gap and make EVs affordable for everyone. One of the benefits of driving an EV is that they have much lower maintenance costs. They require much less maintenance and operation costs than a traditional gasoline powered vehicle. And I drive an EV myself. We've got a Nissan Leaf. It's a great little car, and it feels very weird to take it into the shop. And they're like, you don't need to come in here for a while. Like, so that's another way that EVs can save people money, in their daily lives. But first we have to close that affordability gap. EVs are for everyone. It's really, and it's so especially important that folks living in communities, in our urban communities, and living in those communities that have that air pollution that's 15 to 20% higher, that's where we need to target EV deployment, so that we can make the air especially cleaner in those communities. So I'm very excited about what we can do with this program to address that.
Well, thank you so much for that answer, and that was actually spot on, and what I really want to hear. So I think that will certainly ease a lot of concerns of my constituents. And also, is there any mention of the funds that will go back into, because you mentioned that the funds will go back into to communities of color or communities which have been harmed by these emissions, and how will those funds be allocated, and will those funds be, and how will those funds be used, and to I guess the communities that are that has been hurt by a lot of the climate issues that we're facing today?
Garrett, do you want to
Sure.
speak to that one?
Yeah.
Did I break up?
No, we heard you. So it's a great question, and I'm excited about one particular facet of this program. Baked in the legislation that's before the legislature, which now says 50% of the proceeds must go back to communities overburdened by air pollution or underserved by transportation. There's also an Equity and Environmental Justice Advisory Board. That board is going to be advising DOT and DEEP on where those communities are, how they should be defined, where those investments should be made, what has the most impact, and then evaluating how those proceeds are benefiting those communities. And it's really focused on trying to ensure that the community, the residents of those communities, have direct input. And the legislation that we are hoping to see passed would delineate out and say the people on that board have to be residents of those communities impacted that are either overburdened or underserved. And that's, I think, something new for Connecticut statutes. You know, you have representative boards, but then you'll have a few people here and there on some boards where it says someone representing this city, someone representing that city. But this takes a step back and says, you know what? We want people who are actual residents of those communities, and they need to have a seat at the table, and they need to be heard, and they need to be involved in the discussions on how those investments can be made. Because investments that will benefit Norwalk and how to invest those proceeds are going to be different from New London, right, or from Stamford. Every community is different. Even if you're on the same I-95 corridor, each community has different transit systems, different geographic layouts, different demographics, and they're all going to be uniquely situated for how those investments can be made.
And Garrett, can
Thank you so much.
Sorry, I was just going to
Go ahead,
piggyback
Rep. Thomas.
a follow-up to something Garrett just said. Is there, if I recall correctly, we're expecting revenue of about 87 or 89 million annually, starting in 2023 and going till 2032. Has there been any thought about how this would roll out in terms of, electrifying the state fleet and the buses alone is many, many million, hundreds of millions of dollars. Would the 50% be going to the local community simultaneous with some of those larger projects, or can you talk through that a little bit?
Yeah, so the program is based on a calendar year. So in the calendar year 2023, 89 million is estimated to be generated. And then in the 2032, we're estimating around $117 million. So about $1 billion over the life of the 10-year window. But in fiscal year 23, you only get half of those proceeds. I think it really is going to be a discussion with the communities, right? I think Greater Bridgeport Transit or Norwalk Transit District, they're going to have specific needs for investing in electrification. The school districts are going to have specific needs for investing in electrification. And that may be the desire of those communities for a portion of those proceeds to be targeted towards that. And the 50% is just at least, right? That's the minimum amount that has to go in. I fully expect that a lot more than 50% is going to go back into communities overburdened by air pollution and underserved by transportation, because where we have all of our CT transit buses, Stamford, New Haven, Hartford, Waterbury, Meriden, those are communities overburdened by air pollution, and we need to invest in reducing diesel particulates and GHG, greenhouse gas emissions, in those communities. So that would be on top of that 50%. And we're pursuing that anyway. I'm excited tomorrow, submitting a grant application to the federal government. Us at the DOT, we're committed. I never want to purchase a diesel bus ever again. I want to make that commitment. I need to find the money to do that, but I don't want to purchase a diesel bus when I'm at the DOT. So.
I love the phrase federal and grant.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so, important to think about these dollars from TCI unlocking, like how they're going to enable us to unlock more federal money. When we don't have any cash to put on the counter, it's really hard for us to get those grants and to be able to make the match that we need to in order to get those dollars working. The other exciting part about this is that we share, we're going to be doing this program together with our neighbors. with Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And when you think about, for example, being able to end range anxiety, right, on our shared interstates, the fact that we're not, doing this alone, that we share, 95 and 91 and, 84 with those states. So it's like there's a great magnifier effect when not only us here in Connecticut will have these dollars, but Rhode Island and Massachusetts as well. So that's another big benefit of doing this program in this way.
One other question.
Thank you so much for that.
We should have coordinated better.
Very
Rep.
representative.
The floor is yours, Rep. Sims.
Well, I just had a follow-up question to what you mentioned about the initiative that is taking place with regional states, and that is a concern with a lot of individuals who are seeking to actually purchase EV vehicles. And the biggest question is, hey, I don't want to be traveling somewhere and there's a charging station within 70 miles of where I am, and I'm probably right there at the where I probably maybe have one bar, one cell left of fuel to get there, and that cell only allows you to get 30 miles up the road. How frequent is this this initiative where you would have charging stations throughout the state, and what time frame do we think that would probably be implemented in the state?
Yeah,
because if that's going to be a concern for individuals throughout the state, if they invest into these EVs, where will they be able to charge? And I mean, if you got 40 people sitting at a EV, and the next charging station, the next EV charging station is not for another 60, 70 miles, what are we doing to lessen that impact on individuals seeking to invest in EVs?
Terrific question. So we know that range anxiety and concern about charging access is one of the biggest barriers for people. When you're on the lot and you're trying to make a decision about buying an EV, that's like the number one thing that holds people back. So there are private companies out there that are innovating in this space and that are poised and ready to make investments in electric vehicle charging. It's a chicken and egg because they want to know that there are going to be there are going to be EV drivers out there who are going to use their chargers. So part of how we get more charging and more build out of chargers is by providing rebates and incentives for the vehicles in the first place. One of the best places for us to do that is with livery vehicles, with taxis, with Uber, with Lyft, vehicles that are being driven all the time, helping to shift over vehicle fleets for businesses. And those are, great opportunities for us to get more EVs on the road. Then we'll see more investment happening in charging. That will follow very quickly. Can you hear me?
No, we hear you.
Oh, sorry. The federal dollars that will be able to use these funds to match, if the American Jobs Plan is enacted, that's going to bring more money for electric vehicle charging. And then the other really important piece is that by having the Transportation Climate Initiative Program dollars available, we're going to be able to invest in filling in the gaps. So where we have, rural communities that want to shift over to electric vehicles, want that opportunity, those may be places that we can fill in gaps with these funds to make sure that they're not left behind. And then the last thing I would say is, we've heard from some gas station owners about their concerns about this program, but the electric vehicles are coming. GM has announced that they are no longer going to be manufacturing internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. And so we need to have this infrastructure ready, and gas stations can pilot new models where they can provide service plazas essentially for folks to do that kind of charging that you talked about, Representative Sims. We've seen that in communities like in California that have much higher electric vehicle adoption, and we're eager to work with gas station owners to help use some of these dollars to fund those kinds of investments in charging that help give them that certainty of what their business model can be in a less carbon intensive future.
Absolutely. And thank you. It's a good point. I have one more question. I beg your indulgence. I know we're very close to our end time, but you know, we've heard in the media so many stories about the Special Transportation Fund, you know, going back years. We know there's a lockbox. We know that this program would operate within the STF, but be segregated, if you will, so that the funding goes to where it's supposed to. But I've received some questions from constituents saying, would it not be better for this funding to go into the green bank? So I'm wondering if you could address that quickly.
Garrett, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, so I'll admit I'm not too familiar with the intricacies of the green bank, so I apologize, Katie. But I can talk about the STF portion where, I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to put on the table. I think the flexibility of the Special Transportation Fund and the protections offered by the Special Transportation Fund, you have the constitutional amendment, you have a protected account within the Special Transportation Fund, keeping those funds separate from all the others that come in as proceeds, and ensuring that it's not being pledged to pay back bonds of the state for our transportation projects, right? That's an important caveat. And then there's the detailed accounting that's produced every single year, both by the agencies detailing out how the proceeds are invested, how much comes in, how it's invested, where it's invested. And then the Equity Environmental Justice Advisory Board is going to do their own accounting and tracking of those proceeds. And I think some of the funds probably can be, you know, the state, the legislature, and the governor and the agencies may want to invest some of the proceeds into programs administered through the Green Bank. I know the Green Bank does do some programs for EV charging. That may be a perfect opportunity for that. I think the fact that we want to target 50% directly into communities overburdened and underserved, I think having the agencies be able to work directly with those communities probably is a little more flexible. But I don't think anything's off the table with respect to working with the Green Bank. They're integral. They are highlighted across the country. Everyone knows how great the Green Bank is at what they do. Commissioner Dykes has been actively involved with them for many years. I don't know if you want to add anything, Commissioner.
No, I think that's exactly right. I mean, we've seen the Green Bank, you know, unfortunately have some of their funding swept in past years, and you know, putting these revenues into the Special Transportation Fund ensures that, you know, it protects against that. But at the same time, as Garrett mentioned, to the extent that there's a program where it makes sense, the Green Bank could be part of the implementation to use their model of leveraging public funds to attract private capital. So I think we get the benefit of both possibilities, but in a way that protects these dollars from sweeps.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Representative Thomas, was that it for your question, or you had a follow up?
Well, I was just going to say we're over time, so I want to be respectful of the commissioner and deputy commissioner for staying a little later than planned. I see, we got a question like 1 minute ago, but if you don't mind, maybe what we'll do is work with your staff, and Chris will get you an answer tomorrow. Or soon. I don't want to promise other people's times. But thank you so much for being here. I think this was very helpful. I think for or against the legislation, I think we can all agree that some sort of urgent action is necessary for us to meet our climate goals. And before I let Rep. Sims bring us home, is there a place people can go if they want to learn more, if they want to dig a little deeper into some of the facts around the program?
Yeah, so we have been putting out a lot of material on our social media accounts, and we've actually had a lot of events that we've been doing with Governor Lamont and Lieutenant Governor Bicewicz over the last couple of weeks. So if you look at the DEEP website, for example, we have pages about the TCI program, and follow our social media channels, take a peek at our press releases, and we've got lots of information there. And we're also happy to share some oh, great, someone already put up the link right there. So but we're happy to take any questions that people have or hear any follow-ups. And I'm sorry it's gotten so dark outside all of a sudden. I was gonna run over and turn on the light, but I think we're getting there. So in any case.
So I will thank you so much, and Rep. Sims, bring us home.
Well, thank you, Representative Thomas, and I just want to thank again Commissioner Dykes and Deputy Commissioner, DOT Commissioner Eucalipto for this well-spent time. It's very informative, not just for ourselves, but for many of our constituents that's on this call. We can't thank you enough. We look forward to continuing this conversation. And with that, this meeting will become adjourned. So thank you so much for everything.